Today's topic is to discuss Shevuos with the Rebbe. And like every other event with the Rebbe, it's almost impossible to really go through everything that went on on Shevuos with the Rebbe every year, because we'd be here the whole day. There's a lot that went on. Kedarke Bakodesh of the Rebbe, when he came to a Yom Tov, it was a very big deal. And so we will talk about some inyonim kloliyim, and then we will also talk about individual years that stood out with some really special, unusual events. Shevuos was one of the Shalosh Regalim, and it seems that Shevuos is the easiest time. It's just a couple of days, and it's some cheesecake, there's some milchiks involved. But be'emes, Shevuos was, you could say, one of the most tiring, difficult, busiest times with the Rebbe, because it was only 2 days. And every night, there were basically 3 nights. The night of Shevuos was a night of Tikkun, and in Lubavitch, Tikkun is very important. The Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe all promoted Tikkun very, very much. The second night was the Talucha. Every year there was a Talucha on the towards the end of the first day of the Yom Tov, to be able to be in Borough Park towards the end of the day. And then on the third night, and second night of Shevuos, there was a Farbrengen, and that was one of these long Farbrengens that went on for 5, 6, 7 hours, depending on which kufa we're talking about. And then there was Kesher Bracha. Kesher Bracha could have gone on for 3 hours. So these were late nights and busy days with the Rebbe, Baruch Hashem, that really made the Yom Tov a powerful, strong, and connected to the Rebbe Yom Tov, as should be expected from Zman Matan Teresenu. Now, Shevuos in the early years was one of the 3 times that the Rebbe would come, Acha Chatzeis Halayla, to do something. On Pesach, on the second night of Pesach, after the Seder, at 1:30 in the morning, the Rebbe would come down to Farbreng. And this went on until Pesach Tafshin Lamed Va'ad Bichlal. The same Seder until Tafshin Lamed Va'ad Bichlal would be Shevuos by night at 3 o'clock in the morning, which was approximately about a half hour or so before Aleis HaShacha in New York. At 3 in the morning, the Rebbe would come down, either upstairs in the earlier years or downstairs in the later years, till Tafshin Lamed Va'ad Bichlal, and the Rebbe would say a Maimah, which would last for about a half hour. And the third thing the Rebbe did, all these 3 things the Rebbe discontinued. The third thing the Rebbe did was on Simchas Torah, the Rebbe would come down after Hakofis and after the meal on the night of Simchas Torah. The Rebbe would come downstairs back to the shul, back downstairs, back from the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment. And the Rebbe would teach a niggin, from Toshin Tesvov till Toshin Chav Dalet. Those 3 were all discontinued. After Toshin Chav Dalet, the Rebbe stopped teaching the niggin. And after Toshin Lamed, when the Rebbe was no longer in 770, the Rebbe was not eating his meals upstairs in the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment. After the Frierdiker Rebbe's Rebbetzin passed away on a Asar V'Tevis Toshin Lamed Aleph, so there was no more Sedarim upstairs, and there was no more Yom Tov meals upstairs. So the Rebbe was not in 770, the Rebbe was home, and the Rebbe did not come back from home. Instead, the Rebbe Farbrengt Erev. So Erev Pesach, or Yud Aleph Nissen, from Tafshin Lamed Aleph and on, the Rebbe Farbrengt on Yud Aleph Nissen. And on the Rebbe Farbrengt also from Tafshin Lamed Aleph and on Erev Shevuos, most of the year. Sometimes Erev Shevuos can be a Shabbos, or Erev Shavuos can be Sunday in the Shabbos before then, or Erev Shavuos can sometimes Yeah, I mean Shabbos and Sunday, right? Like last year, Shabbos was Erev Shavuos. Next year, Sunday is Erev Shavuos. Either way, it's hard to verbring. Motzei Shabbos is very late this time of the year, and so in a year like Memhei, Rebbe verbringt on Thursday night. Lamed Zayin, Memhei when Erev Shavuos was a Shabbos. In Lamed Zayin, Erev Shavuos was a Sunday. And the Rebbe verbringt also on Thursday, and not on Shabbos, interestingly. And so on. So, but basically, the Maimah that the Rebbe said on the night of Shevuos was basically transformed to Erev Shevuos. Now, the Erev Shevuos Verbringen was a Shevuos dicke Verbringen. Oh, it's already entering into the atmosphere of Shevuos. And the Verbringen then usually included a Maimah. Not usually, but basically every single year. Cannot think of a year that didn't have a Maimah in it. This was the Tzemach Tzedek would say Chassidus on Erev Shavuos. And during the meals in the year of Tafshin Chav Ches, somebody asked the Rebbe about this, this Indian of saying a Maimah at 3 o'clock in the morning after Tikkun. And the Rebbe said that the Tzemach Tzedek said the Maimah. So they said, it says, Tzemach Tzedek said it in Erev Shavuos, in Hayem Yom and other places. And so the Rebbe said, Erev Shavuos means before Matan Torah. And this was a scene. The last time the Rebbe did this was Toshin Lamed. I was there, except I wasn't at the Maimah. I was only 6 years old, and I wasn't shy to be at this Maimah at 3 in the morning. But from all the different people that I've spoken to about this, and from all the Yamanim that I've read about this, this was one of the moments. Imagine the Rebbe teaching a new Nigun. Imagine the Rebbe coming down just to say a Maimah. It was different than a Verbringen. A Verbringen usually had at least 1, 2 sichos or many more. But just for the Rebbe just to come down to say a Maimah, that was officially only one time in the year, Shevuos by Nacht. It was reserved for Shevuos night. And everybody would be standing. There'd be no benches. No one was sitting. And the Rebbe would come in to, when we're talking downstairs, the Rebbe would come into the regular Verbringen place. And the Rebbe would sit down on the chair. And then the Rebbe would fiddle a little bit. Every time the Rebbe said a Maimah, the Rebbe would put a tichel, a handkerchief, over his left hand. Sometimes over his right hand. And the Rebbe would do it under the table. And unless you really paid attention, you wouldn't notice it necessarily. And when the Rebbe said a Maimah with a Nigun, the Rebbe, like the Nigun that we say Mamorim in that sing-song tune of when the Rebbe said a Maimah like that, it usually started with a Nigun before, a Nigun Hachana. The Maimah Nigun. We call the Maimah Nigun. Shavuos by night, the Rebbe never asked to sing the Maimah. The Rebbe would come in, the Rebbe would sit down, the Rebbe would do something under the table, obviously putting the tichel, the handkerchief that nobody saw, but you can just see some movement. And then the Rebbe would start the Maimah. Sometimes the Dibba Moscow was B'shor Sha'olah Moshe Lamorim. When Moshe went upstairs, up there to Shamayim, and he had an issue with the Malachim, B'shor She'ekdimu Yisrael Na'aseh L'nishma, with the usual, mainly Dibra Moscow of the also by the Verbringen Rosh Shavuos. The Rebbe never said that the Verbringen Rosh Shavuos, Shamayim Dibra Moscow B'shor Sha'olah Moshe Lamorim. But the Rebbe did say many times, B'shor She'ekdimu Yisrael Na'aseh L'nishma. That was one of the most steady Diburei HaMaschil of Erev Shavuos. And the Rebbe would say this Maimah would go on for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. There was no seats because the Rebbe was coming to say Maimah. Nobody sat when the Rebbe said a Maimah with a Nigun. When the Rebbe finished a Maimah, there was no Nigun either. The Rebbe would finish the Nigun, the Rebbe would obviously remove the tichel, and the Rebbe would look around, look at the clock sometimes, and then the Rebbe would stand up and walk out. So this happened on the first night. And again, the Rebbe mentioned Kama pamim about the importance of saying Tikkun. And in 770, there was a big crowd who would come back to say Tikkun. And that was something that we all did, and we finished it. It was very important to say Tikkun. One of the many virtues of Tikkun is that it doesn't have inyanim in it. It just has simply psukim, and you can't really get into anything. It's not like learning. It was the oisius of the Torah shebichsav, oisius of Torah, mezok Torah. It's simply a matter of saying something, not havana v'hasaga. It's the acceptance. It's a Kabbalah soil, naaseh, and then v'nishma. And so the Tikkun, the Indian of Tikkun is to simply finish saying the words, and that's why the Rebbe came down at 3, giving enough time, 2-3 hours for people to come back from their homes to say Tikkun. Shevuos by day was Aseres HaDibros, obviously, the first day of Shevuos. And in Tafshin Mem, this is when the Rebbe started calling for children. The truth is, in Lamed Tes, the year before, Tafshin Mem, the Rebbe, I failed to say, by the way, that on a Chodesh Sivan, there was often Farbrengens or Siches, or if Beis was on Shabbos, it would be on Shabbos. The Chodesh Sivan was the beginning of the whole process. And in Tafshin Lamed Tes, on the Chodesh Sivan, Matzah Shabbos, the Rebbe asked that there should be a special campaign to be ma'orah children, to include children in the activities of Shevuos. He didn't call them to bring them to Aseres HaDibros. The Rebbe just said they need to work with children, that there is an issue that needs children. And so much so that the Rebbe on Erev Shevuos, at the Farbrengen on Erev Shevuos, the Rebbe asked that all the children be brought to the Farbrengen, and that the Rebbe is going to give each boy and girl under Bar and Bas Mitzvah a siddur. And in the siddur would be a letter, and the letter should be filled in, the Rebbe said, by the parent with the kid's name in it. It should be addressed to that personal kid. And the Rebbe handed out Siddurim then. Then on the Farbrengen of Shevuos, the second day of Shevuos itself, the Rebbe asked for all the children, boys and the girls, to say L'chaim and to sing Lebedik and Niggin. And the Rebbe stood up to dance during that time. And I have not been able to figure out, as much as research I did, what was the issue that the Rebbe obviously prevented by doing this extra campaign with the kids during that time of the year. I looked back at the dates and I Googled it and to see if anything happened in the world that might have been an issue. And to this day, I have not yet found what it was. And that's really so that really was the beginning, the Hagdama, to what happened in Tafshin Mem. In Tafshin Mem, it was Shnas HaShloshim, Shloshim Shana of the Rebbe's Nesius. And there was an unbelievable Farbrengen on Yud Shvat, big, massive, one of the biggest Farbrengens that ever. 3 weeks later was Rosh Chodesh Adar. And the Rebbe spoke about the Hesodus that was, and now where is it going? What are we doing with this Hesodus? And the Rebbe talked about a new tkufa of Shloshim Shana, and that something needs to be done. And the Rebbe called on people on yeshivas and kollelin to give out koftzin, Chidush Torah. That was a big thing, Torah. And then 1 month later, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan Tafshin Mem, the Rebbe began a campaign to bring children, get children involved in Yonei Pesach. And the Rebbe pushed this very, very strongly. And it came out with something called the Matzah Ball contest. And everybody was involved with that. The contest for kids to participate in Siddurim and so on and so forth. And after Pesach, the Rebbe pushed for like Beimer parades everywhere around the world, not just in Brooklyn, not just by the Rebbe. It was a Sunday that year. And then after Lag B'Omer, the Rebbe began to call, specifically on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the Rebbe began to call about bringing the B'neinu Ovim Ba'ateinu, that the children who are the guarantors, that they should be brought to Aseres HaDibros, because that's what the Eibishter wanted. And that was a very big push every year. The Rebbe didn't push the Lag B'Omer parades or the Pesach programs, not nearly as much as the Rebbe pushed for the children to attend Aseres HaDibros. And we make a very big deal out of it, because that was a big mitzvah Shevuos, a mitzvah Aseres HaDibros, a big shturim of the Rebbe. And that was in Tafshin Mem. And of course, 4 months after that, began Tzivus Hashem, the children's campaign that began in Shnas HaShloshim, Shloshim Shana, culminated in the Rebbe establishing Tzivus Hashem in Tishrei, Sukkot, Tafshin Mem Aleph. So that was a big deal, and everybody would try to bring their children to the Rebbe's minyan. It was a packed crowd, despite the late night before. And then everybody went home to eat, but you didn't have much time, because the Talucha, Mincha, was always early on the first day of Shevuos by the Rebbe's minyan. And after Mincha, pretty much every year, the Rebbe would come out on the steps of 770 at the door. And as soon as the Rebbe came out, Reb David Raskin, who was in charge of the Taluchas, to him, Talucha was the most important thing in the entire year, bar anything else. To him, the Talucha was the Rebbe's Haninyan, and it was Chok V'Layaver. And he would say, David Raskin, that he would say that the Eibishter Geholfen, and it started to rain. Because if it's not raining, it's Dama walk, it's not a big deal. But if it's pouring and you're going in a Talucha, that does haste the Talucha. That means that you're going because the Rebbe wants you to go. This was the soldiers marching, and the Rebbe would come out like a general and stand by the door. And as soon as the Rebbe came out, Reb David Raskin standing in the front of the line, they would start the Napoleon's march, and people would march. The Rebbe would usually clap or encourage with the hand, Mizman, Mizman. And there were years where the Rebbe went like this to the crowd that was standing there, like, go, everybody should go in the Talucha. He sent the old people, Bachurim, Gambasuz, the Kenim, the Orim, everybody, move, get away, and go march in the Talucha. And by the Farbrengen of the second day of Shevuos, the next night, the Rebbe would always, it was every year, the Rebbe would say a sicha specifically about the Talucha. And in Mem Daled, the Rebbe spoke about the smart boy who decided to go to a closer place because he's too smart to go too far. There's a long sicha about that on Shevuos Mem Daled. And the Talucha would go, and the Talucha wouldn't come back till about midnight. And when we got to Borough Park, and it's not that far of a walk, it's only about 3 or 4 or 5 miles. When you got to Borough Park, there would be a big rikud on one of the avenues, I think 13th Avenue there, and then everybody would go to different shuls which had been organized before the Yom Tov to go to different shuls to speak, and usually to speak something about from the Rebbe. Either there was a letter from the Rebbe, a Michtav Kloli, that had come out for Shevuos, and several years had that, or a word from the Erev Shevuos Farbrengen, or from a different sicha, from different thing. In Tafshin Mem Tes, the Rebbe came down to Mincha, I think it was 6 o'clock, and after Mincha, the Rebbe turned around and said a sicha. Said a sicha for people to chaza in the shuls. Torah Chadasha, specifically for the Talucha. It was about 15, 20 minutes or so. The Rebbe also said a sicha on Shvius Pesach that year, after Mincha, before the Talucha, adding another Nakuda to the letters that the Rebbe had sent out for that year Pesach. Anyway, so the Talucha would go. Now, when the Talucha came back, in the days that the Rebbe was eating the meal upstairs in the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment, that means Sultav Laman, the Chevra would come back to 770, and the Rebbe would be in his room by then. And the Rebbe would, people would gather inside of 770, in the hall, And the Rebbe would come out and be ma'oded the singing. The Rebbe would say a few words, or would ask Rabbi Chadikov to say a few words. And then, once the Rebbe went back home, the Rebbe was home. In Tafshin Mem Gimel, the Rebbe was in the library for the first time on Shevuos, I believe. And Tafshin Mem Gimel, the Rebbe came out at about midnight to the door of the library where the Rebbe was for Yom Tov. And the Rebbe said, like, the Rebbe was looking for the crowd. Somebody ran up. The Rebbe said, where is the crowd that came back from Talucha? This is the first year that the Rebbe was in the 770 area for Yom Tov, since Lamed Aleph. And so there was a few guys over there, and the Rebbe was the singing, weiter and wieder and weiter. I remember I missed it to my great chagrin, but I remember some of the Bochrim Chazering, the whole scene. And from then on, every single time they came back from the Talucha, which would be on Shevuos Pesach and on the second night, after the first day of Shevuos, the Rebbe would come out to the library door. This is till Tismach, and the Rebbe would be ma'oded the singing in a very, very strong way. You could see the excitement and the simcha on the Rebbe. And in Tafshin Nun Aleph, the Rebbe even said a sicha outside, a short sicha about Nami Lochem. It's Bigematria Kates. And on Shevuos, it's Lochem. Anyway, and when the Rebbe was in 770, after Tismach, the Rebbe came out to the door of 770. In the front door of 770, that's where the Rebbe would receive the crowd that came back. I must say that scene of the Rebbe standing at the door and seeing off the troops, if you will, and the Rebbe being makabel the Talucha back, one of the most incredible memories of the Rebbe, it's a more Yitzid different type of thing, where the Rebbe would come out, push it to see you off kind of thing. You're going to a different neighborhood, a crowd, a march of thousands of people, and the Rebbe was like Bereshenu. It was really, really something spectacular. The Rebbe would stand with his hands down, almost like a general. When the Rebbe came back, there was this simcha of, you did what I wanted you to do. The Rebbe's an Inyan, and the Rebbe gave tremendous kaiches and tremendous chayis in this particular mivtza, the mivtza of Talucha, the mivtza of going to different shuls and bringing to them the simcha of Yom Tov, and moving begam parshat, bringing them the Rebbe's Torah. This was very, very special, really a special moment. And it just happened Shevuos Pesach, Achar Pesach by Nacht, and on Shevuos by Nacht. And yes, there were sometimes mabul that would come down from Shemayim. I mean, deluge of pouring rain, buckets. And sometimes you came back and you were finished. You were soaked to the bone. And it didn't matter. We all went. And even those that weren't speaking, the crowd was important for the Rebbe that there should be this taluch, this march. And by the way, before everybody left, there was a kiddush in the Lubavitch Shul, in Tzemach Tzedek Shul in Borough Park, for everybody to make kiddush and to eat, for refreshments, some cake, there was mazenis and some soda, for people to eat, something to Tayim Zayin before we were going back. It was already Nacht by then, obviously. It was well into the night and when that happened. And that was the second night. You didn't get home till midnight. Then you had to make kiddush again, and then you have your Suda. And then was the second day of Yom Tov. And then the second night, before Shkia, a few minutes before Shkia, the Rebbe would come down. Usually it would be about 8, maybe 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock, depending obviously on the year. And the Rebbe would come down to the Farbrengen. The Rebbe would wash at that Farbrengen, like the Rebbe would wash on Achar Pesach by the Mashiach Suda, by the second day of Shevuos at the Farbrengen, and the second day of Sukkot until Tafshin Chavtes, v'ad b'chlal, and then on Simchas Torah, on the day of Simchas Torah, before Shkia, the Rebbe would wash. This is a chiddush of the Rebbe, that the Rebbe would come to at the end of the Yom Tovim, and once you wash, you can extend the Yom Tov for a few more hours into the night. This was something that was important to the Rebbe, to not to finish, don't run away from the Yom Tov. You actually add to the Yom Tov, hours and hours to the Yom Tov. And of course, the Rebbe would bench at the end. The Rebbe would lead the benching. And it was still Yom Tov when people from the Arei HaSada would drive in after Havdalah and still catch 2 or 3 hours of the Farbrengen, certainly in the earlier years. And so this was the Farbrengen of Shevuos, and then the Rebbe would give Kesher Brach. The Rebbe would bench on the kos, and then the Rebbe would stand up to daven Ma'ariv right on the bima of the Farbrengen. They would bring a stender up over there, and then the Rebbe would turn around after Ma'ariv and make Havdalah. Those are the only times that the Rebbe made Havdalah, because on Shabbosim they didn't have this on a derech klal. There were certain Shabbosim in the year, as we'll soon see, that the Rebbe did this as well. But this was reserved for Yom Tovim. And then the Rebbe would give out, after Havdalah, the Rebbe would give out Kesher Bracha. In Kesher Bracha, the Rebbe would give out also little bottles of mashke in the later years. And that went on until Tavshin Mem Tes, Ba'ad B'chlal. And then the mashke was given out at the Farbrengen, so it was different. But at that point, the Rebbe would give mashkes a bottle of mashke to all those shluchim and askonim and so on. So that is the general skira of Yom Tov with the Rebbe. Now, from Tavshin Lamed Ches and on, the Rebbe also farbrengt on Yud Beis Sivan. Yud Beis Sivan in a weekday. Now, if Yud Beis Sivan was like Thursday, like Lamed Tes, for example, like this year, Yud Beis Sivan, this Kviyas of this year, Yud Beis Sivan is on Thursday, and the Rebbe farbrengt on Shabbos already. But Lamed Ches, there was a farbrengen on Yud Beis Sivan, and Tavshin Mem, there was a farbrengen on Yud Beis Sivan. Mem Aleph Sivan was on Shabbos, so there was a farbrengen on Shabbos. Mem Beis was farbrengen Yud Beis Sivan. Mem Gimel was Shabbos. Mem Daled was incredible. At the end of the farbrengen, the Rebbe said that the Rabbanim are here. All the Rabbanim would come for Shevuos, and the Rebbe said that they should all say L'chaim. And Barash Godel, with a big shturim, everybody should say L'chaim. And not all the Rabbanim were very quick in doing this activity. And the Rebbe said that Sadikim Daimim Le'Beiram, at the end of the waiting for a couple of minutes, the Rebbe said like this, Sadikim Daimim Le'Beiram. It says that the Chazal say that Sadikim are similar to the Creator, to the Eibishter. And the Avalachas Kama V'Kama Rabbanim. If Tzadikim are like the Eibishter, then the Rabbanim certainly. So vice versa, it seems that the Rabbanim are behaving like the Eibishter, where it says, Loi Beruach Hashem, it says that the Eibishter is not in a noisy way, but in the, it's a quiet thing. It says in the Pasuk to Eliyahu Navi, Eibishter was saying, Melachim, Eibishter was saying to Eliyahu Navi that you're looking for God in the wrong places. You think that God is in the noisy places, but actually I'm in the quiet place. So they're quiet. And then the Rebbe said, since we're just common people and we're not Rabbanim, we're going to make the biggest noise. And the Rebbe went, and that was really unbelievable. Among a lot of other different incredible things that happened on Yud Beis Sivan. Mem Hey was a Shabbos, Mem Vav and Mem Zayin was Farbrengens. Mem Vav, the Rebbe said the Sicha and the Rambam of that day about Kisei Hadam at the end of Hilchos Shchita, Siyam and on Sefer Kedusha. Just a beautiful, beautiful Sicha, and it's in Chelik Chav Zayin and Parshas Emer, Parshas Achar Emes. So Yud Beis Sivan really became the end. Yud Beis is the Tashlumin, and that became also a focal point after Lamed Ches. It was a really nice geschmack. It was like Shevuos being extended for an extra time, an extra long time. And another different thing that happened in Mem Beis on Yud Beis Sivan was that the Rebbe had introduced the Nigan Sheyabana on Lag B'Omer Tavshin Mem Beis, and that was only 3 weeks before Yud Beis Sivan. And on Yud Beis Sivan, the Rebbe came into the Farbrengen and asked to sing Sheyabana. Sang it 3 times, and all of a sudden the Rebbe said, after Sheyabana. That was the Hachana Nigan to the Maimer, which was Yetzedev. The whole Farbrengen was unusual. Anyway, Ein Kama Kaimai. So Yud Beis Sivan brought the end of Shavuos. Now, I want to go back to certain years. What I just said now was basically every year. Basically every year. They say that every year. It was a busy time, and it had like everything in it. And that there was from here to there to there to here, there was, you hardly had a chance to relax. It was late nights. As I said, the first night was Tikkun, the second night was the Talucha, the third night was the Farbrengen and Kosher Bracha. And then after Lamed Aleph, Erev Shavuos was also a night. You'd have a Farbrengen that night. So really 4 nights in a row, and the days were busy. Now let me go through some of the years. Again, it's impossible to go through all of the years. Every year was special and beautiful, like it was really every minute with the Rebbe was like that. But there were certain years that some very highly unusual things happened. In Tafshin Chav Dalet, and that was, by the way, the year I was born. 1 week after that, I was born. And on Tafshin Chav Dalet, the Rebbe asked people to say, the Rebbe towards the end of the Farbrengen said that he was very disappointed that nobody said L'chaim for the Russisch Yidden, and there was a Shas HaKosher. And everybody picked up the cups and started saying L'chaim, and the Rebbe was Mavatlet. The Rebbe spoke with great meridus, very, very sharply about the opportunity that was there to hasten the release of the Yidden from Russia. That year, Reb Mendel Futterfass came out of Russia, and it was a miracle that he was able to come out. And it seems like the Rebbe was trying to get things going, and people didn't chatzach that year, the year itself, was a major, important year. And indeed, it waited. And Chav Ches, Chav Tes, and Lamed were the years that the next throng of Russian Jews came out. It took a few more years. The Rebbe was very unhappy about that. That is in Tavshin Chav Dalet. In Tavshin Lamed Hey, 1975, was one of the most unbelievable Shavuos. The Rebbe had agreed that the learning of Tanya, they had given out the English Tanya, which means that the entire text of Tanya was printed in English, in a book. And there were people who wanted that the Tanya in the Hebrew and the Tanya in the English should be in the same book. And you never mess with the Tanya, obviously, so the Rebbe had to be consulted. People were not quite excited about it. And one chassid presented this to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe became very enthusiastic about it. The Rebbe wanted this to happen. And there was the Tanya was going to be the bilingual Tanya. That's what it's called, Adayemazah. 2-language Tanya. And the Rebbe wanted it to be dafka printed in England, where the English language is from English. And the Rebbe also wanted it to be printed by a prestigious printing press, not Stam, a press, but that the printing press should be involved with it. And the Rebbe gave mamish detailed instructions to, my grandfather was part of the committee together with Rabbi Sudak, Oliver Shalom, and Herschel Gorman, and a guy called Perrin from Manchester. Anyway, a couple of people from London, a couple of people from Manchester together had this committee, and they were in charge of this. The Rebbe sent instructions. For example, that the Hebrew needs to be on the right side of the book. So when you, on the left side of the book. So when you open the book, from right to left, you should see the Hebrew in front of you. The Rebbe wanted it to be printed on very specific paper. And the Rebbe wanted to make sure that they had ribbons, 2 ribbons in every book. V'chulu, v'chulu. There were mamish detailed instructions about this, even the fonts and things like that that the Rebbe was involved with. And it took 5 years. It started in Tarshan Lamed, and it took till Lamed Hey. The Rebbe would be pushing this a lot over the years to my grandfather, like what's Schleppenzach? And it's Schleppenzach in the press. The printing press doesn't know how to do something in 2 minutes. It took them the years. They weren't interested in dropping everything and just doing this because you decided that it's important. And so it took them 5 years. Lamed Hey, the Tanyas were finished just by about Lag B'Omer time. And they asked the Rebbe if they should come for Lag B'Omer to bring the Tanya. And the Rebbe said, come for Shevuos. My grandparents always came for Shevuos. That was their yontif. So the Rebbe said, come for Shevuos, bring it down. And then they were wondering when the Rebbe wants them to present the Tanya to them, when they should present the Tanya to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said he should do it by the Farbrengen of Eresh Shavuos. And that Farbrengen was, the Rebbe said 2 sichos about Masechta Seita, the Messiah Masechta Seita. And then the Rebbe gave a signal that the people should come up. And they brought 2 cases, I think it was 2 or 3 cases, boxes, big boxes of the Tanyas that were placed under the Rebbe's table before the Farbrengen, with 5 Tanyas that were outside of the boxes, ready to be presented to the Rebbe. Why 5? 1 was for the Rebbe, 1 was for the Rebbetzin, and 1 was for the library. But each one of them presented something to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe gave the signal for them to come, and they came over to the Rebbe. Rabbi Sudak went first, and he gave the Tanya to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe gave him a mashka, a vodka, and a copy of the Michtav Kloli that the Rebbe had given out for that Shavuos. And then the Rebbe did that to the other chevra of the committee who were there. Just the 4 or 5 people who were there. There was a group from England came, about 35 people came. When the Rebbe finished giving them the mashka and the letters, they were all standing in the Rebbe's bima, on the Farbrengen bima, and the Rebbe turned around and said a sikha about this. And the Rebbe said that the biggest thing about Tanya is Hafatzas HaMayonos, and that the Frierdiker Rebbe was the first one to open it up. The Rebbe said, and the Rebbe repeated this a couple of times over the next Farbrengens that happened, about when he get to Tanya. But this is the Rebbe publicly gave a yasher kayach to the people who were standing right there in the sikha. It's muger, these sikhs, in Chelik Yud Gimel, in the back, in the surface of Chelik Yud Gimel Kut sikhs. And then, after the sikha, the Rebbe started calling specific people. The Rebbe called my father, the Rebbe called Tiefenbrunn. Who is Tiefenbrunn? And the Rebbe asked for their children. Then the Rebbe said, bring daher zu alle English citizens. You can hear this on the tape. Bring here all the English citizens. That means all the people who had come in this group. And everybody came up, and the Rebbe gave mashka and this letter to children like me. I was then 11 years old. The Rebbe gave a piece of cake and some wine. And when the last person had gone through, everybody remained on the Rebbe's bima. And the Rebbe put up the finger for the Alter Rebbe's niggin. The Rebbe would always put up how many times to sing the last part of the 4th stanza of the Alter Rebbe's niggin. Sometimes it was 1, most of the times it was 1, sometimes it was 3, it could have been 5, it could have been 7, it could have been 10 in the early years. It was always with the finger. And the Rebbe put up the finger, and the Rebbe started the Alter Rebbe's niggin, which was the only time the Rebbe did that. And different, quite a little bit different than the way we sing, how we start the Alter Rebbe's niggin. And there was no hachana, and there was no nezheritz chlopzi after that. Just the Alter Rebbe's niggin, and the Rebbe's face was aflame. I was standing mamish 3 feet from the Rebbe. And it was an amazing thing to see the Rebbe's face then. I remember the Rebbe's face from that time. The Alter Rebbe's niggin, the Rebbe was very, very serious. The Rebbe looked down. Sometimes the eyes were closed. The Rebbe was always, but this one was different. And B'meshech HaYom Tov, Sayan the Yom Tov, Sayan the Shabbos after Shabbos Nosai, the Rebbe mentioned this Tanya again. He gave praises to Hillis V'Sishpachas, mamish unreal. Ad kedei kach, that on Tes Zayin Sivan was a Monday, the day that the group was going back, group family was going back, the Rebbe said he was going to come out to the steps of 770 to say goodbye to the Urchin, which is something the Rebbe did usually Tishrei time, or usually sometimes when groups were coming, the Rebbe would sometimes go out, but the Rebbe hadn't done it in a while. This time though, they brought out the stender, which means that this was not stam going to be a bagleitin, stam a goodbye, but there was going to be something going on. And the Rebbe came out at 5 o'clock, and the Rebbe started saying a sicha outside of the Lag B'Omer parade. This was like the first time the Rebbe just was saying a sicha on a day like this. Also Muggah, by the way, in the back of Chelik and Gimel. And at the end of the sicha, the Rebbe gave an English Tanya to all the guests who were coming from places that spoke English. I remember Rabbi Groner from Australia. He was there. He received the Tanya. Any guest that was there from an English-speaking country. People from countries that didn't speak English, they never gave a regular Tanya. And also to Bochum, like me, didn't get the English Tanya. I got a regular, no cheating for me. I got a regular small pocket-sized Tanya. And this was like the ultimate display of nachas from Dafke Teure Sachsidus, Dafke by Matan Teure on Shevuos. That was in Tavshin Lamed Hey. I mentioned before about Tavshin Lamed Tes, and that was a special year because of the kids. And in Tavshin Mem was a special year because of the kids again, Terses Adibris. In Mem Aleph, as I mentioned before, Eretz Shevuos was a Sunday. And so at the Farbrengen of Shabbos Nosei, that year Shabbos Nosei was before Shavuos, Farbrengen of Shabbos Nosei, Daled Sivan, Erev Shavuos, the Rebbe spoke very strongly about the Sefer Torah for kids that the Rebbe had promoted at the Yiralf Nissen Farbrengen just 7 weeks before. And the Rebbe said that from the amounts of numbers that I'm getting, it's not enough. And this is the Welt Shakeltach. He didn't say the word Shakeltach. I don't remember the exact expression. But the Rebbe said something about there's a big need for an extra added measure of focus. And he's asking that everybody go out Sunday, next day on Erev Shavuos to sign up the kids for the Sefer Torah, go out and sign, put tefillin on. And on that night, the night of Shevuos in Israel, they went out to Iraq to bomb the nuclear facilities of Russia, Saddam Hussein, Yimach Shemayim. And so the Rebbe pushed this very, very strongly in Mem Aleph. In Tavshin Mem Hey, Lag B'Omer, at the Farbrengen of Lag B'Omer, and then again, by Moarichis on Shevuos, Rebbe spoke very strongly about the Rambam. Rebbe had started the Rambam, obviously, Mem Dalet, and in Mem Hey, on Yiralf Nissen Mem Hey, there was a Siyum HaRambam. And the Rebbe was promoting these Siyumim very, very strongly. Everybody should make a Siyum HaRambam. And by the way, it's a Dova Be'itay because this cycle of the Rambam, 39th cycle of the Rambam, will finish in a few weeks, finishes on Shevuos B'Tammuz, coming up in just about 6 weeks. And the Rebbe made a very big shturim about the Siyum. And there was a certain element of Yidden who live in Brooklyn, and the leader of that element was came out to condemn the Rambam. Macht chesek, the Rebbe said. He made fun of the Rambam. And the Rebbe took that very, very strongly. And I'm not going to go through the whole Indian here because you can look it up in the Sikhs. And the Rebbe's Verte you can read. Toshin Mem Vov, on Shabbos Bahar B'Chokesai, the Rebbe asked that there should be a Shabbos of Achdus Yisrael, with the emphasis of Achdus. The Rebbe said, the Rebbe said those words, and it's in the Sikha as well, that the Shabbos before Shevuos, Shabbos B'Midbar, should be a strong emphasis on Avos Yisrael. And ever since then, people do this Shabbos Achdus, although the Rebbe never called for it again. It seems like it was a one-time thing by the Rebbe, but I guess there's nothing wrong with Achdus. Anytime, Allah has come before Shevuos, and that was a very big deal, and it was the big theme, Sai, of the Shabbos B'Midbar Farbrengen, with a lot of emphasis on kids then, but also on Shevuos, the Farbrengen of Shevuos. The Rebbe said, "The Maimon Shevuos Ata Hareis Aladas," and it was Magia that Maimon, which was another very unusual development. This was in the early stages of the Rebbe being Magia Mamara. For that Shevuos, the Rebbe was Magia, also the Maimon of Lahavin Inyan Ksiva Sefer Torah from Tesh Shvat Tavshin Lam. In Tavshin Mem Tes, it was a Shabbos like this year, the Kvias of this year. And in Mem Tes, the Gabbai got up, it was a Shabbos, the Gabbai got up after davening and made the regular announcements that they would make after the Shacharis, after Musaf. And he forgot. And he said the Rebbe's Farbrengen will take place at 1:30, which was the time where Rebbe Farbrengen on every Shabbos. And again, it was Shabbos, but it was Shabbos Yontiv, not Shabbos. And the Rebbe wouldn't Farbrengen then at 1:30. The Rebbe would Farbrengen before the Shkia. And everybody started saying, started correcting him. He said, and the Rebbe turned around and made with the hand. And the Rebbe said, and so that year, there was 2 Farbrengens in Toshin Mem Tes. At 1:30, a short Farbrengen that went till about 3:34, and then another Farbrengen before the Shkia. Both of them about Shavuos. The Rebbe split the Farbrengens up. It was 2 Farbrengens. The biggest 2 Farbrengens happened in Toshin Nun Aleph. In Toshin Nun Aleph, Shavuos was Sunday, Monday, and that Shabbos was Yud Beis Sivan. And the Rebbe Farbrengen, as the Rebbe did every single Shabbos from Tismach and on, and there was a Farbrengen that Shabbos, and everybody left. Then, about a half hour or so before Shkia, the Rebbe was seen, it might have been a little bit before a half hour, the Rebbe was seen walking into the Zal downstairs. And there was just a handful of people hanging around, learning. Some were preparing for the Seder Nigunim that they used to have, and with Seder Nigunim and a Maimah. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, the Rebbe walks in. The Rebbe has a towel over his shoulder, and in the Rebbe's hand is a kvart that's filled with water. And the Rebbe walks like this, and the Rebbe had a siddur as well. The siddur, a kvart, and a towel over the shoulder. And the Rebbe walks all the way up to the front of the shul, and the Rebbe says, and I heard this from Rabbi Nachum Kaplan, he told me this. He was there. He was there to prepare, as he says, he was there to prepare for the Seder Nigunim that he would be part of, he would lead. Anyway, the Rebbe, he went over to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, he's asking if there's a place to wash. And if there's any challah around, it's out of the blue. And somebody went out and found some kind of keli to bring, and the Rebbe washed into the keli while somebody else went to find some challah, and they managed to get some challah to the Rebbe. There was no salt, and there's a little table in front by Mizrach near the Aron Kodesh, and they took the Rebbe's chair and at the table, and the Rebbe dipped the challah into the other challah, one challah into the other challah, like for the salt, and the Rebbe ate the challah. And then the Rebbe said he wants to farbrengen, he wants to speak, and he wants to go up on the bima. And they brought the Rebbe's chair up on the bima. They wanted to bring the table. The Rebbe pushed away the table, said no. The Rebbe leaned his siddur onto the banister, onto the handle, the rail, going up on top of the steps of the Rebbe's bima. And the Rebbe began to say a sikha. The Rebbe asked to sing Reihechola. The Rebbe asked to sing all the nigunim of all the Rabbeim, just like a farbrengen before Shkia, a similar type of situation. And at the end of this very, very unusual farbrengen, in the Beis Sivan, the Rebbe the Rebbe benched, and then the Rebbe daven ma'ariv, and the Rebbe made Abdullah. The Rebbe gave kosher bracha from the same place that the Rebbe would usually give dollars after sichos and kontresim, things like that. And that was mamish an amazing experience. And this, in a way, this like out of the most unexpected, out of the blue kind of thing was one of the more geschmacked things to be about the Rebbe, that these surprise farbrengen and surprise moments and so on and so forth. This really is a lesson to us in what it means that Mashiach comes behesach hadas, that all of a sudden it's just going to show up one day. It's just going to happen. And when it happens, the whole world's going to imagine what's going to happen in this world. Imagine the farbrengen. Imagine the kosher bracha. Imagine the dancing on Har HaBayis. Imagine the Rebbe greeting all his troops, like he did on these Talucha farbrengens. And it's not so far-fetched. It happened already before Gimel Tammuz. And that's Mashiach Bo Behesach Hadas, Matzosi David Avdi. These are the things that will just suddenly appear, according to Chazal, and it'll happen. And all of a sudden, it will be here. What we need to do is make it come sooner. We do everything that we can to make this happen. And we need to be ready, because it's going to happen sooner, much sooner than we expect. And it should happen, Teikef Umiyad Mamash. L'chaim. I'm not sure what happens now. Is the coordinator, do you have your microphone working yet? For every single person, for every single chosin, for every single yidden, for Klal Yisrael, for Kol Olam Kulei, there should be bracha v'hatzlacha laba for everybody.